At 23, she was forced to marry her father's best friend, a powerful millionaire government envoy. She never thought her life would take such a turn. She had always believed that love should be about choice, not obligation. Her days were once full of laughter, friends, and small dreams, working in a small design studio, saving money for her own apartment, and believing that someday she'd meet someone who would love her for who she really was. But life had different plans. Her father had always been her hero, strict but loving. He was a man of deep respect in their town. Everyone admired his loyalty and honesty. But behind that pride, he was struggling. Business debts, political pressure, and family expectations had built a silent wall of worry inside him. He never showed it, but his eyes carried the weight of it all. One evening, she returned home to find her father sitting with a guest, a man in his late 40s, dressed in a tailored suit, calm, composed, with a kind of authority that filled the room. Her father stood up quickly and smiled, almost nervously. "Come meet him," he said. "He's an old friend of mine, someone I trust more than anyone." She greeted the man politely, noticing how he observed her, not with lust, not with arrogance, but with a strange kind of distance, as if he was studying something far beyond appearances. He was a powerful government envoy, well known in the city, someone who could open doors others couldn't even knock on. That night, at dinner, she noticed how her father and his friend talked quietly, in half sentences. She didn't think much of it, until the next morning when her father called her into his room. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "I need you to do something for me. It's not easy, but it's necessary." She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, Baba?" He sighed, looking down. "He asked for your hand." And I said yes. The words hit her like cold water. She thought it was a joke, an old-fashioned conversation she could laugh off. But her father's face said otherwise. "I can't do this," she whispered. "He's your friend, he's too old, and I don't even know him." Her father's eyes softened. "He will take care of you. You'll have everything you ever dreamed of. Respect, safety, a future. I know you don't understand now, but one day you will. Sometimes we don't choose our path. Life does." She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. But she saw something in her father's face that she hadn't seen before. Guilt. And behind that guilt, fear. She didn't know what kind of trouble he was in, but she knew one thing. He was desperate. The following days passed in silence. People started visiting the house, women bringing gifts, tailors measuring fabric for her wedding dress. Every sound felt unreal, the laughter of relatives, the clinking of bangles, the whispers about how lucky she was to marry such a powerful man. But she didn't feel lucky. Every night she cried quietly, her pillow wet with tears, hoping someone would wake her and tell her it was all a nightmare. She thought about running away, but then remembered her father's weak smile. "It's for the best," he had said. The day of the wedding came too soon. The house was glowing with lights, flowers, and gold. She sat in front of the mirror, dressed in red, her face pale under layers of makeup. Her hands trembled as her mother placed a veil over her head. "You're going to a good home," her mother whispered, but her voice cracked halfway. When she walked into the wedding hall, everything felt slow. The music, the lights, the murmurs of guests. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the priest's words. She glanced at the man who was about to become her husband. His face was calm, unreadable, his eyes kind but distant. He looked like someone who carried a world of secrets. When the ceremony ended and the guests cheered, she felt her old life fade away, not in fire or drama, but in quiet acceptance. The car ride to his mansion was silent. She looked out the window, watching her city disappear behind her, the streets where she once laughed and dreamed becoming nothing more than shadows in the night. When they arrived, the mansion stood tall and silent, surrounded by guards and stone walls. Inside, everything looked perfect, polished floors, gold frames, expensive paintings, but it felt cold. She realized this was not a home. It was a kingdom built for one man and his loneliness. He showed her around politely, his voice low and calm. "You'll have everything you need here," he said. "If there's anything you want, just ask," She nodded but said nothing. He paused for a moment, then added, "I know this wasn't your choice, but I will never hurt you." That night, as she sat by the window in her new room, looking at the moon, she felt the weight of her fate settle in. She wasn't angry anymore, just empty. She whispered to herself, "Maybe one day I'll understand why life chose this for me." And with that, she closed her eyes and was a stranger in her own story, standing at the doorway of a life she never asked for. The first morning in the mansion felt unreal. The sun filtered gently through heavy curtains, but the room still felt cold. She sat by the window, wrapped in a soft shawl, staring at the garden below. Everything looked beautiful, the trimmed hedges, the marble fountain, the silence, yet it all felt lifeless. Beauty without warmth. She had slept little the night before. Every sound, every creak of the old house kept her awake. She kept thinking about her old home, the faint noise of the street, her mother calling her for breakfast, her father's slow footsteps in the morning. Those sounds were gone now, replaced by quiet servants and polite nods. A soft knock broke her thoughts. A woman, probably in her 40s, entered with a tray of breakfast. "Madam, sir has gone to the office," she said kindly. "He asked me to make sure you eat." The woman's tone was gentle, but there was a formality in her words, a reminder that she was madam now, even though she didn't feel like one. She managed a faint smile and thanked her, though the food felt tasteless on her tongue. Hours passed. She wandered through the mansion's long corridors, her steps echoing off the marble floor. Every wall was covered with portraits and expensive art, but no laughter, no sign of life. She could feel the emptiness in every corner. In one of the rooms, she found a small library. The smell of old books filled the air. She ran her fingers along the spines. History, politics, law, philosophy. Everything reflected the man she had married. Educated, serious, distant. But in one corner, she noticed something different. A dusty violin case. She opened it slowly. Inside was a beautiful old violin, a string missing but still elegant. She smiled faintly. For a moment, she felt connected to something, maybe to the person he used to be before power and responsibility took over. That evening, he returned home. She heard his footsteps before seeing him, calm, confident, unhurried. When he entered the living room, he paused for a moment, as if unsure how to speak. She stood up politely, unsure what to say either. "I hope you're settling in," he said softly. She nodded. "Yes, everyone has been kind." He looked around, as if searching for words, then said, "If you need anything, books, clothes, even to visit your parents, you only need to ask." She wanted to ask him why he married her, why he chose someone who never said yes from the heart. But the question stayed locked behind her lips. He didn't seem like a cruel man, just a lonely one. A man who didn't know how to fill the silence in his own home. Days turned into weeks. Their lives moved in quiet routines. He left early every morning for work, surrounded by security cars and phone calls. She spent her days reading, walking in the garden, sometimes helping the staff. Everyone respected her, but no one really spoke to her. One afternoon, she saw him sitting in the garden reading the newspaper. She hesitated before approaching. "Would you like some tea?" she asked gently. He looked up, slightly surprised. "Yes, that would be nice." It was a small gesture, but it broke something, the wall between them. They sat together, sipping tea as the wind rustled the trees. For the first time, he asked about her life before marriage, her work, her interests, her friends. She told him about her dreams of becoming an artist, her love for painting, and how she used to watch sunsets from her old balcony. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally. "You should start painting again," he said after a while. "There's a studio room in the East Wing. It hasn't been used in years. Maybe it's time someone brings life back to it." That night, she stood by the window again, thinking about his words. There was something sincere in the way he spoke. Not as a man trying to control her, but as someone trying to give her back a piece of herself. Over the next few days, she explored the studio. Dust covered everything, but the large windows still opened to sunlight. She cleaned the space, rearranged things, and finally picked up a brush again. The first strokes on the canvas felt awkward, shaky, but they were hers. Every evening, he would stop by quietly, standing at the door for a moment before saying, "You've been busy," and leaving a faint smile behind. She began to notice the small things he did, how he made sure she had the books she liked, how he left the lights on in the library when she stayed up reading, how he spoke to her with patience even when she stayed silent. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something and a soft beginning. One night, there was a power cut. The entire mansion went dark. She lit a candle and walked down the hall, only to find him sitting in the library with a lantern, lost in thought. "You're not afraid of the dark?" he asked, his tone calm but curious. She smiled faintly. "Not anymore." He looked at her for a moment, then said, "Good. Darkness teaches us how much we need light." Something in his voice, something fragile and human, stayed with her long after that night. For the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like someone rediscovering her strength, quietly, slowly, in a house that had once felt like a cage. She didn't know where this strange connection would lead, but deep down, she sensed that her story with him wasn't just about force or fate anymore. It was about two souls learning how to live again, one scarred by power, the other by pain. The days in the mansion slowly began to change. The silence that once felt heavy now carried a strange calmness. She had begun painting again, colors flowing across the canvas like the words she could never say. The studio became her world, a place where she could breathe freely. Every morning she saw him leaving for work, the same black car, the same serious face, the same quiet nod before stepping out. But lately something in his eyes had softened, as if he was learning to see her, not just live beside her. One afternoon, while arranging her brushes, she noticed a small wooden box on one of the high shelves. It was covered in dust. Curiosity made her reach for it. Inside were old photographs, a woman with kind eyes, a little boy smiling beside her, and him, younger, laughing freely. She froze. This was a side of him she had never seen. The woman in the photos looked gentle and warm, her eyes glowing with life. On the back of one picture, a faint handwriting read, "To my love, thank you for teaching me patience." Her heart ached. She didn't know what happened to the woman, but something told her she was gone. Suddenly, his silence, his distance, his loneliness, they all made sense. That evening, when he returned home, she hesitated before mentioning it. "I found a box of photos in the studio," she said softly. "I hope you don't mind," he paused. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "It's all right. They belonged to my wife." His voice was low, steady, but there was a tremor beneath it. She looked at him quietly. She looked kind. He smiled faintly, a smile filled with both memory and pain. She was. "She passed away a few years ago. After that, I stopped living, I think. I only worked, only existed." She didn't know what to say, so she just listened. Sometimes silence was the kindest answer. After that night, something shifted between them. He began talking a little more, small things at first. Stories from his work, the stress of politics, his love for music, his late wife's favorite songs. He wasn't trying to impress her. It was more like he was remembering how to be human again. One day, it started raining heavily. She was standing by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass, when he entered the room holding 2 cups of tea. "You always watch the rain," he said. "You like it?" She smiled. "I do. It makes the world slow down." He handed her a cup and sat beside her. For a few moments, they just watched the rain together, the soft sound filling the space between them. "It's strange," he said after a while. "I used to hate rain. It reminded me of endings. But now, maybe it's not so bad." She looked at him and said quietly, "Maybe rain doesn't always mean endings. Sometimes it's just a new beginning washing everything clean." He turned to her then, and for the first time, she saw warmth in his eyes, the kind that made her heart tremble. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how unexpected life could be, how she once feared this man, and now she felt a quiet respect for him. He was still distant, still careful, but there was something deeply gentle about the way he treated her. The next morning, one of the servants mentioned that he had canceled a big meeting because she wasn't feeling well. "Sir was worried," the woman said. "He even called the doctor himself." It made her pause. He didn't say anything to her about it, didn't make a show of concern. But actions, she realized, spoke louder than any words. A few days later, she decided to thank him. She cooked a small dinner, simple food, nothing grand. When he came home, she greeted him at the table. He looked surprised. "You cooked this?" "Yes," she said with a shy smile. "I thought maybe you'd like something homemade for once." He tasted it, and for the first time he actually laughed, a soft, genuine sound that filled the air. "I'd forgotten how real food tastes when someone cooks with care," he said. That laugh stayed in her heart all night. As days passed, she noticed more about him. The way he read every morning before work, the way he paused to listen when she spoke, even when she rambled about simple things. The more she saw, the more she realized he wasn't a cruel man, just one who had lost too much and forgotten how to love. One evening, she found him sitting in the study, staring at an old violin, the same one she'd seen weeks ago. He was turning it gently in his hands, lost in thought. "Did you used to play?" she asked softly. He nodded. "She loved music. We used to play together. After she was gone, I never touched it again." She hesitated, then said, "Maybe you should. Not for her. For yourself." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Something wordless passed between them, a quiet understanding, a shared loneliness slowly healing in each other's presence. That night, she heard the faint sound of a violin coming from the study. The notes were soft, a little broken, but beautiful. She stood in the hallway listening, smiling to herself. For the first time since her marriage, she didn't feel like a stranger in that house. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. And though she still didn't know where this road would lead, one thing had become clear. Her heart had started to open. Not out of force, but out of something deeper, something real. The sound of the violin became a quiet part of her nights. Sometimes soft, sometimes uncertain. Like a soul remembering how to speak after years of silence. She never entered the study when he played. She just listened from the corridor, letting the music fill the empty corners of the mansion. Days began to feel lighter. The staff noticed it too, and the house didn't feel so cold anymore. She smiled more, painted more, even hummed tunes while walking through the garden. And though he rarely said it, she could sense he noticed. One morning, while having breakfast together, something that had slowly become their new routine, he looked at one of her paintings resting on the wall nearby. It showed a woman standing in the rain, her face half hidden, but her eyes full of hope. "That painting," he said softly, "it looks like you." She looked up, surprised. "Like me?" He nodded. "Yes, you carry sadness in your eyes, but still there's light. Not everyone has that." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. No one had ever seen her that clearly before. But just as life began to feel calm, fate decided to test her heart again. One afternoon, while organizing the library, she overheard two of his assistants talking in low voices in the hallway. They mentioned her father's name. Curious, she stepped closer, hidden by the wall. "The old debt was cleared after the marriage," one said quietly. "He agreed to the arrangement because it protected his contract. The envoy saved his company from a major scandal." Her heart sank. She froze in place. So that was the truth. Her father hadn't just been pressured. He had traded her marriage for his own protection. The floor beneath her felt like it disappeared. Everything she had started to believe, the growing affection, the quiet kindness, the idea that maybe fate had a reason, suddenly felt like a lie. That evening, when he came home, she couldn't even look at him. She stayed in the studio, pretending to be busy painting, her hands trembling. He noticed instantly. "You seem quiet," he said gently. "Did something happen?" She hesitated, then turned toward him, eyes filled with tears she had tried to hide. "You saved my father, didn't you? That's why you married me." The words hung heavy in the air. He didn't deny it. He looked away, his jaw tight. "Yes," he said finally, "but it's not what you think." She laughed bitterly. "Then what is it? You wanted to help him and I was the price?" His voice stayed calm, but there was pain in it. It wasn't a transaction. "He came to me, desperate. He didn't ask for money. He asked for someone to protect you. He said you were too trusting, too soft for this world. I didn't agree because I wanted to own you. I agreed because I wanted to keep you safe." She stared at him, her chest tight. "Safe from what?" "My own choices." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "From men who would see your kindness as weakness. From the people who would have destroyed your family. You don't have to believe me, but I swear I never meant to hurt you." Her eyes filled again. "You could have told me," he sighed, looking away. "Would you have stayed if I had?" Silence. He was right, maybe she wouldn't have. But knowing the truth still burned inside her. She couldn't bear to look at him anymore. That night, she packed a small bag and left the mansion quietly. The guards didn't stop her. Maybe he had told them not to. She walked for hours, her mind spinning between anger, confusion, and heartbreak. She ended up at her childhood home, her mother shocked to see her at the door. "My child, what happened?" She couldn't even speak. She just cried, long silent tears that soaked her mother's shoulder. Her father came out of his room, guilt already written on his face. He didn't even ask what was wrong. He already knew. "He told you," he whispered. Her voice cracked. "You gave me away to save yourself." Her father broke down too. "I didn't want to, I swear. I thought he would protect you. I thought it was the only way to keep us alive. I failed you." She wanted to hate him, but she couldn't. The truth was too complicated for hatred. Her life had become a web of love, sacrifice, and choices no one wanted to make. Days passed in her old home, but she didn't feel at peace. She missed the mansion's silence, the sound of the violin at night, the way he looked at her as if she mattered. It hurt to admit, but she missed him. One evening, a car stopped outside. She didn't move, but her heart did. He stepped out, dressed simply, no guards, no arrogance. Just him. He didn't try to enter. He stood by the gate and said softly, "I'm not here to take you back. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I never wanted your life to feel like a bargain." She stayed silent, tears burning her eyes. He continued, "If you want to be free, I'll arrange everything. No pressure, no guilt, just peace." He turned to leave, but before he could, she finally spoke. "You could have lied to me." "Why didn't you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you deserve truth, not comfort." And then he walked away, leaving her with a silence that said more than any words could. That night, she sat alone in her room, her heart torn between anger and compassion. She realized love wasn't always kind or clear. Sometimes it was made of mistakes, sacrifices, and the courage to be honest when it hurt the most. She didn't know if she would go back. But she knew one thing: her heart wasn't the same anymore. It had learned what love really looked like: imperfect, painful, and deeply human. The next few weeks passed like a blur. She stayed at her parents' house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The rooms were smaller, the air heavier, the world quieter. She tried to convince herself she was free now, free from him, free from a marriage that was never her choice. But freedom, she soon realized, felt lonelier than captivity. She woke up early every morning, trying to paint, but the colors didn't flow the same. She would start a sketch and then stop halfway, her mind drifting back to moments she didn't want to remember. His quiet laughter during dinner, the way he said her name when he was calm, the sound of the violin echoing through the mansion at night. Her mother tried to comfort her. "You did what was right," she said softly one morning. "You deserve peace." She smiled weakly but said nothing. Deep down, she knew peace wasn't just about leaving. Sometimes peace was about understanding. And she wasn't sure she understood him yet. To clear her mind, she started teaching art classes to neighborhood children. The laughter of those little ones filled her heart in a way she had forgotten. Their innocence, their curiosity, it gave her something to hold on to. Slowly, she started to feel a spark of herself returning. One afternoon, while she was helping a girl mix colors, she noticed a black car parked near the corner of the street. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought it was him. But when she looked again, the car drove away. She tried to brush it off, but something inside her whispered that he was still watching over her, quietly, from a distance. A few days later, a letter arrived. No name, just a seal she recognized instantly. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short message, written in his careful handwriting. I heard you've started teaching again. I'm proud of you. Take care of yourself. No signature. No pressure. Just quiet words. Enough to fill her heart with confusion and warmth all over again. She folded the letter and kept it in her drawer, but she found herself reading it every night before sleeping. She hated how much peace it brought her. Weeks turned into months. She was beginning to smile again. Not the forced kind, but real small smiles that reached her eyes. She had stopped thinking about what people said, stopped worrying about the past. But one evening, everything changed. A news report flashed on television, a major political scandal involving his office. She froze. The reporter mentioned his name, said he was accused of corruption by a rival minister. The words hit her like a punch. Her father came into the room, frowning. It's nonsense, he muttered. That man has more integrity than all of them combined. But she could see the tension in his eyes. For the next few days, the news spread everywhere. Articles, rumors, false stories. People she barely knew whispered things about him, calling him greedy, manipulative, powerful in all the wrong ways. She couldn't take it. Whatever had happened between them, she knew he didn't deserve this. She had seen his honesty, his quiet strength, the way he carried burdens alone. One morning, she made up her mind. She packed a small bag and took the first train to the city. When she reached the mansion, it looked different, quieter, darker, almost abandoned. The guards weren't at their usual posts. The garden had lost its life. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding. It was the same house, but it didn't feel the same. The old housekeeper opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. Madam? Where is he? She asked quickly. The woman hesitated, then said softly, He's in the study. But he's not well, ma'am. He hasn't been sleeping, hasn't been eating. He told us not to bother him. She didn't wait. She walked straight to the study. He was sitting by the window, his face tired, his eyes hollow. There were papers scattered all over the table, documents, reports, letters. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, disbelief flickering across his face. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. She stepped closer. Then tell me to leave. He looked away, his voice low. I can't. For a moment, they just stood there in silence. Then she spoke softly. I saw the news. I know you didn't do what they're saying, he gave a tired smile. In this world, truth doesn't matter much. Power does, she took a deep breath. Then let me stand with you. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if trying to understand why she had come back. After everything I did, you still trust me? She hesitated, then said, I don't know if I trust the man who forced me into marriage, but I trust the one who made tea for me when it rained, who told me the truth even when it hurt. That's the man standing in front of me now. His eyes softened, emotion flickering beneath the exhaustion. You shouldn't have to fight my battles, she smiled faintly. Maybe not, but maybe this time I'm choosing to. For the first time in months, he laughed. A quiet, broken sound that carried more meaning than words ever could. They sat together in silence after that. She didn't ask for promises, and he didn't try to explain everything. Sometimes love wasn't about fixing the past. It was about showing up when it mattered most. That night, as rain began to fall again, the mansion didn't feel so empty anymore. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether the world would believe his truth or not. But she knew one thing for sure. This time, she wasn't here because of duty or guilt. She was here because she wanted to be. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still smelled of wet earth and change. She woke up early, sitting by the window of the mansion. the same window where she had once watched the world go by like a stranger. But today it felt different. She wasn't the frightened girl who had once wanted to run away. She was the woman who had come back by choice. He was in the study again, his eyes heavy with sleepless nights. She walked in quietly, placing a cup of tea beside him. He looked up, surprised but grateful. "You didn't have to," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "You said that the first time I made you tea, remember?" He chuckled under his breath. "I did, didn't I?" The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was calm, the kind that comes when two people have already said everything that needed to be said. He handed her a file. "These are the reports they used against me," he explained. "False contracts, fake approvals. Someone planted them." She listened carefully, reading through the pages. "Then prove them wrong," she said. "You've spent your life helping others. It's time to fight for yourself." He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know if I have the strength for another fight." "You do," she replied gently. "You just forgot how strong you are." Her words lingered in the air like sunlight through clouds. Over the next few days, she stayed by his side, not as a wife bound by obligation, but as someone who believed in him. She went through papers, helped organize meetings, even visited old friends of his to gather proof. Everyone who saw them together could sense it. Something unspoken, something powerful had changed between them. He no longer looked at her like someone he had rescued. He looked at her like someone who had saved him. One evening, as they sat in the garden going through files, he paused suddenly and said, "You should have hated me." She looked up, her expression calm. "I tried," she said honestly, "but it didn't work." He smiled, a small, broken smile. "Why?" "Because you never treated me like I was yours to control," she said. "You gave me space to hate you, to leave you, and to come back when I was ready. That's not something a cruel man does." He said nothing for a moment. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "When I lost my first wife, I told myself I'd never open my heart again. But you made me remember what being alive feels like." Her eyes softened. "And you made me realize love doesn't have to come the way we expect it. Sometimes it grows in the places we least wanted it to." The world outside still doubted him. The accusations continued, the newspapers printed half-truths, and the opposition tried to destroy his name. But through it all, she stood by him, calm, unwavering, fearless. People began to notice her presence, the quiet grace with which she carried herself, the strength behind her calm eyes. She had become his anchor. One night, after a long day, he found her asleep on the couch, papers scattered around her. He picked up a blanket and covered her gently, his gaze lingering on her peaceful face. For years, his house had been filled with luxury but no warmth. Now, with her there, it finally felt like a home. In the days that followed, things began to change. The truth about the false reports started coming out. One of his aides confessed under pressure that the rival minister had paid to frame him. The news spread quickly, clearing his name. When he told her, she smiled quietly and said, "See, the truth always finds its way back." He looked at her with eyes that held gratitude and something deeper. "You never gave up on me," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't give up on what I saw in you." For the first time, he reached out and took her hand, not with hesitation, but with certainty. "You've done more for me than I ever deserved." She met his eyes. "Maybe love isn't about deserving. Maybe it's about understanding." They sat in silence after that, hands entwined, watching the sunset from the garden. The same garden that had once felt lifeless, now glowing with new color. The mansion wasn't cold anymore. The staff smiled again, laughter returned to the halls. And for the first time, she painted a portrait, not of pain or confusion, but of peace. It showed two figures sitting under a tree, surrounded by light. When he saw it, he whispered, "Is this us?" She nodded. "This is how I see us now. Not perfect, but real." He didn't reply, just smiled and said, "Then let's stay that way." That night, they walked together through the quiet house, their footsteps soft against the marble floor. Every corner carried memories of silence, of distance, of love slowly blooming in the shadows. When they reached the window where she had once cried alone, he turned to her and said, "Do you still feel like a stranger here?" She looked around and smiled softly. "No," she said. "Now it feels like my story began here." He took her hand, and for the first time, it didn't feel forced. It felt like home. Years passed, quietly but beautifully. The world outside moved fast. Governments changed. Names faded from the news, and people who once whispered about them now had their own stories to tell. But inside that old mansion, life moved slower, softer, almost like time had decided to take a breath. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried laughter, conversation, and the comforting rhythm of an ordinary life. The housekeeper often said, "It feels alive again." And she was right. She had built her little world there, a small art room filled with sunlight, flowers by the window, the smell of tea always drifting through the halls. Her paintings hung across the mansion, not of sadness or longing anymore, but of quiet mornings, rain on glass, and hands that had learned how to hold without fear. He had changed, too. The sharpness in his voice had softened, the distance in his eyes replaced by calm. He still worked, still carried the weight of responsibility, but now he came home not to escape the world, but to return to it. Some evenings they would sit in the garden just watching the sunset. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was warm. It was theirs. One evening, as they watched the sky fade from gold to pink, he said quietly, "Do you ever regret it?" The way our story began, she turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I used to," she admitted softly. "I used to think of the things I lost. My freedom, my dreams, my say in what my life should have been." He listened, not interrupting. "But now," she continued, "I realize maybe life doesn't always take from us. Sometimes it gives in ways we don't recognize. I found strength I didn't know I had. I found peace in places I never expected. And I found you." He looked down, his eyes glistening with quiet emotion. "I don't deserve that kind of forgiveness." She smiled faintly. "It's not forgiveness," she said. "It's understanding." They sat in silence again, watching the first stars appear. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked into the study and found him playing the violin, a slow, soulful tune that floated through the air like a prayer. The same violin that had once been covered in dust now sang again. She leaned against the door frame, listening, her heart full. When he stopped, she said softly, "You play differently now." He smiled without looking up. "Maybe because I finally have something worth playing for." She walked over and placed her hand on his shoulder. "You always did," she whispered. The next morning, she began painting again, her biggest piece yet. It wasn't about sadness or love this time. It was about life. She painted the two of them standing side by side under a tree, the world behind them, light pouring through the branches. In her eyes, it wasn't a picture of romance. It was a picture of peace after a storm. When it was finished, she showed it to him. He stared at it for a long time, his voice soft when he finally spoke. "You've turned our story into something beautiful," she smiled gently. "It was always beautiful, Ake, we just didn't see it before." Time continued its quiet march. Their days became simpler. Morning walks, shared meals, laughter over forgotten keys or burned toast. There was nothing grand about their love anymore, and that's what made it perfect. It wasn't built on power or fear or fate anymore. It was built on choice. One night, as they sat by the window, rain falling outside just like the first night she had come to that house, he reached for her hand. "Do you remember what you told me that day?" he asked. "That rain doesn't always mean endings?" She laughed softly. "Yes, I do." He looked at her, his eyes warm and full. "You were right. For me, it meant the beginning of everything." She leaned her head on his shoulder, listening to the rain's soft rhythm. The world outside had once been her escape. Now it was simply background music to a life she had made her own. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who sat crying in this very house, believing her life had ended. and she wished she could reach back in time and tell that girl, "You're going to be okay. You're going to find love, not because someone gives it to you, but because you learn to open your heart again." Years later, when people spoke of them, they didn't talk about power or wealth. They spoke about how love had changed them both, how a marriage born from force had grown into something real, something that didn't glitter, but quietly glowed. In the end, her story wasn't about tragedy or submission. It was about courage, the courage to stay soft in a hard world, to choose love even when it came wrapped in pain, to find light in places no one expected. And as she stood by the window one last time, watching the rain fall gently across the garden, she whispered to herself, "Maybe love was never meant to be perfect. Maybe it was meant to be true." He came up behind her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The rain kept falling, steady and endless, not as a memory this time, but as a promise that sometimes, even from the most unlikely beginnings, love can still find its way home.